magic is known to happen during the last discussion panels at conferences, if only to reward the perseverance of those staying with us to the very end of the day. And I would imagine that the moment Caroline hears me talking about magic happening, it only kind of raises her blood pressure. Caroline, please join me on the stage right now. Let's welcome Caroline, who's the moderator. Caroline Lewis, Sustainable Agriculture Analyst at Bloomberg NEF. Let's welcome Caroline with applause. It's not an easy task to moderate the last panel discussion. We will be... Caroline, can you... Hi. Can you stand closer to me for a while as these gentlemen just set up the tables, put some water on the tables. We were talking about improving our hydration habits, etc. So let us read out the title of this last discussion. As you can see, this is completely unrehearsed. I'm going to ask Caroline only one question, completely improvised and unrehearsed, which by the looks of surprise on her face can be confirmed, as you can see. Caroline, the title of our debate here is how we can create a sustainable, equitable, and low-carbon food system. Even at expert conferences, when people see something like that, they think, well, it sounds like let's heal the world or let's make the world a better place. A bit too fluffy, doesn't it? So if I were to ask you this question with the panelists who are going to sit here in a moment, like 5 experts in the field, if you were to think about the most intuitive, because you had a really great presentation at the beginning of the day, the most intuitive top 3 bottlenecks in preventing it happening. What would be, before you start the discussion, what would be your gut feelings around this? Top 3 bottlenecks.
So I think investment in technology is the first one. I think market mechanisms is the second one. And I think the third one is probably looking at policy reform.
But you do know that if something is not working as we would hope it is, people are keen to blame it on the money or lack thereof, right?
Yes.
All right, so choose your seat, make yourself really comfortable.
Thank you.
And I will introduce our speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, we have Giovanni Causapruno joining us, Agrifood Business Unit Manager at xFarm Technologies. Giovanni should be somewhere here. Wonderful. We have Felipe Lima, Strategy Director, BU Beef at Vion Food Group. We have Sébastien Pellion, whom you already know, Global Head of Impact and Sustainability at Glovo. We have Rob Genieser, Managing Partner at ETF Partners. We have Hanna Gabay, Advisor at Beyond Investing. Let's welcome them again with applause, please. And let's wait for the magic. Caroline, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So yes, today we're looking at the question at, how can we create a sustainable, equitable, and low-carbon food system? So over the past 50 years, we have seen our food systems develop drastically, and that has meant that we've been able to feed millions of people. And of course, now we're starting to see the rewards/impacts of these intensive systems. And of course, these issues include degrading soils all the way through to biodiversity loss. So the key question here is, how can we create a sustainable, equitable, and low-carbon food system? So I've already spoken about technologies, market mechanisms, and policy reform, but here I'm joined by 5 panelists who can help us answer this question. So before we take a deeper dive into these topics, I would like to ask you all about your companies and where they fit in, and why do we need to be looking at a sustainable and net zero food system? So I'll start with you, Giovanni. Could you please kick off?
Sure. Thank you, Caroline, and good afternoon, everybody. So I'm Giovanni Causapruno. I'm the responsible at xFarm for B2B business. xFarm is a company that is dealing with farm management. So we do farm management in order to help farmers manage their operation in the fields and become more sustainable, meaning reducing the resource that they use. And we'll come back to that in a while, I guess. And we also work with food companies. So main European food companies like Barilla, Peroni, and other important brands, which are trying to make their supply chain more sustainable. And so we work with them in order to digitalize the full supply chain, gather data from the supply chain, and with this data make informed decisions about how they can work with farmers in order to reduce the carbon emission of their supply chain.
Great, thank you. And Felipe, I'll move on to you.
Sure. Thank you. And as it was introduced, I'm a little bit out of my comfort zone here because I'm the strategy director for the Bio Beef. So I work in a meat processing company, Vion Food Group. We are one of the largest ones in Europe. And we understand that the beef business is very much linked to sustainability in the other side of the spectrum. So we are seen as the big villain in sustainability. And I don't disagree with the global averages and so on. But we believe that we are able to be sustainable in a different way of doing business than the standard way done in the US or in South America. I'm originally from Brazil, so I know that I could see firsthand the differences that a sustainable production method, a sustainable farming can bring to the supply chain. But we are going to discuss a little bit more about that.
Thank you. And moving on to Sébastien.
Thank you. So I'm Sébastien. I'm the head of impact and sustainability at Glovo. So Glovo is a technological company. So we built a digital marketplace that connects couriers with restaurants, groceries, supermarkets, retailers, and customers. No? And our vision is to be able to deliver everything to anyone in the cities where we operate. And I say that impact and sustainability has been built at the very core of the business since the beginning. So Glovo has been founded in 2015, and very early we created a sustainability and impact team. And we've defined some goals so that the areas where we are working on right now to reduce our environmental impact and our greenhouse gases emissions are packaging, single-use packaging, which is something that is generated by the delivery industry. The second aspect we're working on is food waste, and we've been talking about food waste a little bit earlier. And the third topic is electrification, because we have a fleet of 70,000 couriers, and one major area of work is to electrify this fleet to reduce the carbon emissions. So the three areas we're working on.
Great, thank you. Hanna.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Hanna Gabay with Beyond Investing VC. We're a VC focused on taking animals out of the supply chain, so a little bit different than Felipe here. And with the target of mitigating the climate crisis. So we have 4 segments that we concentrate on, that we focus on. One is alternative protein. The other one is ingredient, alternative textile, and animal testing alternatives. We launched a new fund last year, and we've been working on a cleaner and healthier world.
That's great, thank you. And finally, Rob.
And I'll go for a very short introduction since I did it once before. I'm Rob, one of the managing partners of one of the first sustainable investment funds in Europe. We're on Fund 4, and it's a real pleasure to be here. So let's go right back to the front.
Thank you. And whilst the mic's with you, actually, Rob, could you please tell us what the pressures and the issues presented to agriculture are today in your sort of sphere? What are the main risks?
Well, you know, I'm going to go off-piste because it says equitable up there. And I'm not going to say what you think I'm going to say. In that, I was reading that the UN was pointing out that there are 20 million refugees today because of climate-related issues. Issues is a polite word, I think. Disasters is perhaps better. You know, 20 million is a lot of people. However, by 2050, there's supposed to be 1.2 billion. And so if you want to think about what's equitable, we should really start thinking about solving the food-related challenges that come with that. A lot of people are going to be forced off the land because of desertation, or the rise of deserts, or the rising seas, the lack of food, the lack of water. And I think we can get quite myopic and just think about what it means to be living in the developed world as opposed to the developing world. And we're going to have to find solutions that benefit all. Otherwise, it's going to be on our doorstep. for those that are living in Greece or places like that. You're already experiencing it today.
Yeah, that's a really great takeaway. Thank you. And I think moving on from that and related, could we move to you, Giovanni? And I'm going to ask you, what does a sustainable system look like to you, and how does your business fit in with this?
Yeah. So I will start from, I would say, the first part of the supply chain. So a sustainable system, I believe, should take into account the entire supply chain, down up to food waste, which I will not talk about in any case, and I will leave to the colleagues. But I will start talking about the first part of the supply chain. If you consider like what we are doing with our customer, for example, if you take one biscuit, the majority of the carbon of that biscuit is produced into the agricultural part. So plants are now optimized. Transportation is something that is being optimized, but really the agricultural part is the vast majority of the carbon emission. Taking one biscuit is around 80% of that. So it's important, this part, because we see that now food companies are understanding this, so are understanding the major source, and are start acting in this way. So start working in supply chains that are close to their production facilities, but that are also made of farmers that are embracing their scope of producing low carbon food. So means low carbon ingredients mainly.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much for that take. And I'm going to come to Sébastien on this one, because of course you're sort of at the other end of the supply chain. What's your take on it, and what is your view of a sustainable food system?
So I think there is a massive opportunity to reduce carbon emissions by transforming the food system. So if we look at, for instance, meat production, no, and Felipe, we can talk about that. But I was looking at the numbers, and the emissions from meat productions is equivalent to twice the emissions of the United States, right? So if you manage to just halve the consumption of meat, this would be like reducing the entire emissions of the United States. So, the potential is massive. And for the business, it's a business opportunity, and that's how we see it, right? Transforming this system can be a $1 trillion opportunity, and that's how we look at it at Glovo. When we look at transforming the way food is packaged. So for instance, we've created a business out of packaging. What we do is actually sell green packaging, sustainable packaging to small local businesses. I mean, the big ones, they already have the capacity to change their behaviors. But as a digital company, we have the economies of scale and the capacity to leverage our network effect to incentivize changing behaviors. So, and I think 2022, we generated 1.5 million euros of revenues with this, with new revenue stream coming from packaging. And if I look at food waste, which is another angle, it's also here an opportunity for us to generate, huge savings. I think in our groceries business, about 2.5% of our revenues are lost on a yearly basis because of food losses. So solving that aspect of our business is good for us. And I could say the same for electrification of the fleet, and which is the way that the food is transported. Electrifying means already now and in the midterm even more is gonna generate savings for us as well due to the rise in the prices of gasoline. So yeah, I think this transformation is both a massive environmental opportunity and a business opportunity as well.
Thank you very much. And sort of touching on that point where you mentioned the beef emissions and emissions from proteins, I'd like to come to Hanna and sort of, get your view on what a sustainable system looks like to you.
So for me, in my eyes, a sustainable system is a local alternative protein-based system. Okay, instead of having animals providing 1 to 10% of calories from what they feed, and 10 to 20% of protein, we want to go directly to the source and use that 70 or 75% of the soy that's produced for feed go to alternative protein and things like that. That's more sustainable, because essentially takes about 25,000 kilos of grain to produce 1 kilo of meat.
Wow, yeah. And just staying on that, I'd like to ask you, is it just alternatives that you're looking at in terms of, is it just plant-based, or are you looking at cultured as well?
So we're, as a company, Beyond Investing is looking at plant-based, precision fermentation, cultivated meat, and biomass fermentation. So everything that can help.
That's great. And now I'm going to come to Felipe, because I know you've got a challenge here, coming from sort of the alternative proteins to sort of looking at beef emissions. And I think, you know, just from my standpoint, I can see how alternatives can be the future, but we need this transition in the meantime. So, Felipe, if you could please tell us, you know, what does your sustainable system look like?
Sure. And I think I'm in a disadvantage here because mainly in the conferences as a whole, I see a lot of trends going away from meat, and I can totally understand that. Because when you look at the statistics in a higher level, in a global average way, they are completely right. And I would go in the same direction if I were them to move away from meat and so on. But when you take a deeper look into how our statistic is mainly built up, then you started to see that there are a couple of things that don't really fit. In my view, the sustainable future is based on a more balance between meat production, food and meat alternatives. We also converted one of our plants to meat alternatives, and we think that that is the trend, and we want to also embrace the change. But if I will give a couple of statistics, you can reach out to me afterwards. I can show you the sources and so on. But one thing that I agree definitely with you, Giovanni, is that most of our emissions come from the farms. I think that there is no question there. For us, it's even more than 80%. It's over 95% that is coming from the farms. But then we start to think, okay, where is it really coming from? You said grain production. Grain production, and I come from Brazil, is the main source of production for beef in Brazil. It's not the main source of feed for Europe, for Germany, where I have the most knowledge about. So it's a difference when you have a grass-fed cattle that is complemented with feed supplier than when you have 100% feed, which is what you have in Brazil. So there you already start to have some differences. When you say about the use of the food that we have from the animals in conversion to the meat, not all the food that the animals eat is eatable for us. And a lot of what we produce in crops is not useful for human consumption. There's a lot of waste there as well. And I see animals as a complementary supply chain ally into giving a destination to that waste. So we did a calculation last year, beginning of this year, and our footprint is 17% of the global average. So 1/7. Without doing anything, without changing the way we are producing right now, we are already at 17%. That puts us in the same level as fish, as poultry in a global average. There are already initiatives. Well, I can list one initiative to reduce methane emissions that would bring that 17% to 10%. So it's only one thing. I was already discussing in how to bring this to market, how to actually make it happen here in the conference. So that's a positive thing that we're meeting here together. But there are ways that we can make it sustainable. And if we make that sustainable, I don't see why not we cannot coexist also in the future, in the long-term future. But this, I reinforce, it's a completely different way of looking at it than what you have in North America, than what you have in South America, than what you have in Australia. It's a different scale. We have about 60,000 farms Our biggest farm is a small independent producer in those countries. So different ballpark.
Yeah, I can see how geographies here play a massive, massive part. And so we've had 4 opinions on what makes a sustainable food system. And I think there's been quite a lot of variation. But I'd like to come to Rob finally. Now that you've heard all of these opinions, what's your stance and how do you think these systems can be scaled?
I feel like I'm the judge and this is the defendants and the prosecutors here. And we've sat these two intentionally with somebody in the middle, by the way, if you're wondering. You know, one of the things that you were starting to pick up on, which I think we can't forget, is that we live in a world where people exist. So you can't take people out of the supply chain, by the way, so that will be one animal that's still in it. But the reason I was thinking about your comments is, I said earlier today that a lot of dairy cows are going to disappear over the next 10 years. But there are 1 million jobs at stake there, right, when you go up and down the supply chain. And there's a lot of political power there. There's a lot of money, invested interests. And so you're not going to change everything overnight. There will be a gradual change. It's very important for her to push, and it's very important for him to reform or do the right thing some more, maybe is the right way to say it. I think if we're all sort of moving forward with that intention, obviously you'll have very good things. But you cannot change everything overnight. We just heard there are not enough bioreactors in the world to support a lot of the innovation that is on the horizon. So, I think the bottom line is that it's an iterative process, and if every group tries to do their best and tries to do the right thing, where governments play a role, corporates play a role, and the average consumer, does the right thing and hopefully switches away from not so nice things, that would be a good thing.
Thank you. And whilst we're over at the far end, could you please give me some insight into which innovation you think is one of the key drivers of change in this space at the moment?
Wow. It's really interesting. When I first started on this, my children applauded me. They said, finally, you're doing something useful. Because I was a tech investor, and all of a sudden I became an impact investor. I don't think there is one silver bullet. I don't think there is one technology. I don't think there is one breakthrough. Maybe the fusion people in the room will say, oh, no, it's fusion. But I think the whole point of this story is that you do need to have radical revolutionary reform in places like energy, in places like food, in places like transport, if we're going to keep the planet from overheating. And it's as simple as that. There is no cure-all. There is no one breakthrough. And it's very important not just to invest in breakthrough technologies of tomorrow, but also make the changes today. And I think people forget that.
Yeah, that's very interesting, and thank you. And I'd like to come to you, Giovanni, when looking at innovation, because I know that's something that is very much what your business is focusing on. So could you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, maybe some more data about xFarm, because maybe I'll give a little bit of context. So we are a startup, actually. So we were born 6 years ago, and our founders are farmers themselves. So started everything from their needs to start to becoming more sustainable in the production in their own farms. What we're doing is we are connecting IoT devices that are put on the farm with machine learning algorithms, artificial intelligence algorithms, in order to provide farmers in their pocket, so basically in the app that they have on the smartphone, quick and immediate suggestions about how to optimize their resource. So how to use less fertilizer, how to use less chemicals, and now, of course, also how to transition them from a conventional agricultural mechanism to new regenerative practices. So how to implement these practices and understand that this can be also economically sustainable for them in the long term, which is one of the main topics where we see resistance today. And so this technology allows to save on their inputs and therefore to make more sustainable the wheat, the corn, or whatever kind of product that they produce.
Great, thank you. And still sticking with this innovation levering change, I'd like to come on to you, Sébastien, and ask sort of how is your company looking at bringing innovation to the space?
All right, so I wanted to go back to Rob's point on the fact that this transformation won't happen overnight. It's going to take time, no? And I mean, in the delivery industry, we clearly see it, right? Because we're delivering, of course, we're not delivering just plant-based meat, and we're delivering a lot of hamburgers and pizza, and that's still what people are ordering massively. So our role is to nudge in some way people, to redirect them to other options, we always keep all the options on the table, but at least generate more awareness about the existence of alternatives. And one major challenge we have is actually to provide good information in terms of the sustainability of the products that we sell in the app. No, good information, because we have millions of products available in the app. So it's very challenging to provide this information. We rely on the restaurants, the grocery supermarket to include this information in their menu. Obviously, Glovo cannot do it right now. So one way that we're looking at it right now is to use artificial intelligence, because this is actually a way we could potentially include more information, smart information on the products that we sell. Imagine, based on the name of the food in the menu, based on the image, we can automatically provide to the customers information about actually sustainability of the product, or is it vegan, or is it vegetarian, or is it plant-based. This is the kind of information that is very difficult to get today manually, very, very difficult to scale. But potentially with artificial intelligence, that's something that we could do in the future. So very excited about the recent developments and the potential that it is opening.
Thank you. And I think we can see here how both of your systems are really looking at data and how that's quite a key part of your businesses. But I'd like to come to you, Hanna, and ask you, we've sort of heard about your technologies and sort of the innovation there. But how do you think that these innovations can be scaled?
So I think that right now innovation is really driving or answering what the market needs in terms of what it's answering. And slowly but surely, we're seeing more and more enablers and more capacity builders getting into the market as innovators, and enabling cultivated meat companies and fermentation companies, etc., creating a way for them to scale up. We're not there yet, obviously, but I think technology is going to play a huge role.
Great, thank you. Rob?
Can I add one thing? I thought the alternative protein panel today was excellent. And within that discussion, there was a big debate going on, which is it enough to innovate, or can you also need sort of the expertise and the money to engineer? And quite often, those are very, very different skill sets that need to reside in a young company. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges for a lot of the businesses that we saw today, that you see companies that are innovating very, very well, but how do you engineer scale? And I think if we want to make a big difference, a lot of those things have to succeed. They're going to need money. They're going to need time. It's not easy for venture capitalists to do that. And so that's why a lot of these businesses, I think, struggle as they grow.
Thank you. And I think similar to that point around scale, I'd like to come back to you, Felipe, and just ask, you were very much saying that European countries are different to those across Brazil and America. How can we tackle those areas and scale the sort of model that we have perhaps in European countries? How can we scale those across other areas of the world?
I think it's interesting that we're using the word scale, because let's look back into the concept of scale. And when we talk about economies of scale, we are always talking about more is better. We are talking about, as we do more, it becomes cheaper, so we have an efficiency increase and so on. But the way we are seeing, at least from the entire supply chain, from an entire supply chain perspective, more is not necessarily better. It comes to a point where you start to be more efficient, but in which variable? you cannot optimize everything. So are you optimizing your volume production, or are you optimizing your sustainability KPIs, or are you optimizing your land use, your soil efficiency? So what are we optimizing for? What is the scale? And if we compare, I mentioned the sizes, the difference in size before, it's a massive difference. So the way I see it, and the way we see it in Vion for the long term, is a scalable but controlled environment. So we are optimizing for sustainability, not necessarily for volume. For the US, Brazil, Australia, that would mean that they would require to change the setup, the country setup. So Brazil, I can speak more about Brazil, having been born and lived there most of my life. It's the land ownership model is different. It's small number of owners, large number of square meters, while in Europe you have large number of farms with small number of square meters. So these play a big difference. And what you mentioned, how fast can we change something like that? It's not fast. It's definitely not fast. But coming to the point of how can we balance it out, I think data is a good start, but it's only a start. Data can tell you where to play, where to act, but doesn't act by itself. You need to find solutions that are really actionable and they are fast. As you were mentioning in the panel about waste, what can we do now? What can happen now? And these actions that I mentioned, the one to bring from 17 to 10, these can be there next year already. There are companies already launching products in that scenario. So the innovation part is done. Now it's about the engineering part. So, and I would say that more than the engineering part, when we are talking about food, the marketing, the media part plays a big role in that. Because I'll give you just an example and then I'm finished. I'm speaking too much, perhaps. We have a product, 70% less plastic for minced meat. You see it in Germany in the supermarkets, but you don't see it everywhere. You still see the hard shell with the layer on top. So this plastic bag has 70% less plastic, but the consumers, they have a feeling that it's a lower quality. They have a feeling that they don't like to touch it, so they don't buy it. What happens is that we don't sell it, we don't produce it. And we, I'm saying not we as a company, we as an industry, we don't produce it. So should we wait for some regulatory government policy change? Or should we have the retailers push it? Or should we have a corporate agreement that we are only going to produce with less plastic? It's not about quality, it's not about price, it's just a perception problem. So how to tackle that? We come away from the data, and we get into the marketing, which sometimes we forget.
Yeah, I was wondering, Sébastien, do you have any takes on that, given that you do a lot around packaging and marketing of the product? Do you find that there's consumer concepts around certain products?
Yeah, that's a good one because it's the key, no? I mean, we need, if we want to reach scale, we need consumer demand. If we want a business case for sustainable products, consumers are key. So we've been running different surveys with our consumers, with our partners as well. For instance, 80% of our consumers says they would repeat their orders if it was coming in a sustainable packaging. I think 14% are asking us to deliver the orders with green vehicles. So we see a good tendency, but the reality is that it's still quite niche, quite small. We still need some push to make sure that the consumers are getting more and more aware and to put some traction. And I think here digital companies like Glovo can play a key role because we're in contact with millions of customers. So we have the app. We have the app to communicate on these topics, to improve the visibility of sustainable products. For instance, we created in a few countries a specific section in the app where customers can order food that is delivered in green packaging. So we can also give more visibility to vegan products, to plant-based products. So we're using the app as a tool to give visibility and to increase customer demand and traction for these kind of products. But it takes time. It takes time, and it's a big challenge. But yeah, through digital and these network effects that I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of things that can be done.
Thank you. And I think we can hear here that a lot of innovations are driven by data, but also driven by perhaps consumer perception, which is really interesting. But I'd like to come to the point, now that we've sort of explored those exciting innovations, what are the strongest forces driving resistance here? And Rob, I'd like to come to you first. What do you think is resisting change at the moment?
I think, to be honest with you, it depends on which market you're in, right? So there's probably, again, no universal answer to that. The forces that are there are obvious, right? I mean, is government behind what we're doing or actually a hindrance? And I think the European governments, compared to the US government, for example, have been much better at passing policies and regulations that have encouraged people to change their behavior. I'm not really a big fan of subsidies, but now the United States is pumping a lot of subsidies into businesses there. But of course, if the next election goes the other way, I'll be curious to see how many of those subsidies stick. So the U.S. has a habit of doing this, whereas Europe is quite progressive. So I think having government on side is really important to start. I think having corporate champions, and I will include you as a corporate champion in this, is really important as well, because there has been a hesitancy on the part of CEOs to put their heads above the parapet and say, we want to change. And we're willing to embrace new businesses or new way of doing business. And you just have to look what happened to the CEO of Unilever or Danone or people like that really got a lot of criticism from their shareholders. Even Larry Fink in the United States, who's a pretty powerful guy, when he said we're going to move more into ESG type of investing, by the way, which is different than impact investing, all of a sudden there are a couple more conservative fund managers that said we're not putting our money with him anymore. So you get a pushback if you're a corporate looking to change. And then finally, it's the consumer, right? I mean, I think you have to educate the consumer. For the food waste panel, I was startled to see that in the UK, we've cut our food waste by 29% over the last 10 years. And people are always making fun of the UK, right, for their unwillingness to change and how traditional they are. But yet, they've done a pretty good job. Why is that? Because I think somebody told them to change and showed them the way to change and educated them to change. There's still a lot more work to be done. But you have to bring the consumer along with you, which is the point that you're making. You just can't show them data, right? You can't just say, here's the new way. And so I think you have three big, powerful groups out there, governments, corporates, and Joe and Joan blog in the street that you have to bring along on the journey. The good news is the entrepreneurs are doing it. They're tackling the challenges. They're coming up with good ideas. We've never seen so many business plans. I'm quite hopeful in that regard.
Thank you. And I'd like to pass this one over to Hanna, because I know that policy is quite a big thing in the alternative proteins world. How do you see policy playing a role?
So on the national level, I think that countries need to start thinking about shifting over to subsidies, unlike Rob just mentioned. I think it is crucial to a shift in alternative protein or alternative food systems. That's one. And on the international level, I think that the United Nations should be putting together some type of framework bridging between the global north and the global south, so that there could be closing the gap in terms of sustainability and also consumer education. I've been working on a side project called the Plant-Based Treaty Campaign, which is doing exactly that, calling on governments to negotiate a plant-based treaty similar to the fossil fuel treaty. I think that it is crucial. We don't have a choice. We're running out of time. In 2021, the UN Secretary General stated that this is a code red for humanity. So we don't have time. We don't have this slow shift. We have to wait, and it's going to take time. We have to do it. We have no choice. We don't have a tomorrow otherwise.
Thank you. I'm wondering, do any of the other panelists have any thoughts on policy in particular and how that will impact their industry?
Now, as I mentioned before, I think policy, we need to move away from policy necessarily coming from government, just that we can also make policies in an industry, as an investor, as a company, as a startup. We can also influence. And I really like discussions like this, where we have different views on how things should go, because this is when we are confronted with maybe new ways of thinking and we move forward. But we cannot wait for policies. So I cannot, as a company, wait for governments to do the policy, because you mentioned something very important, is very volatile. And for me and for the farmers that I'm in contact with, the worst thing is the uncertainty. If they are certain that it goes in that way, even if that way is not the best way, it's better than to not know if in 2 years it's going to shift that way, or in 4 years it's going to shift that way. So I would be a little bit careful. Not to say that we don't need the help of policies, but let's not wait for policies.
And maybe I will build on that, because I fully agree that I would say in our business, at least, food companies can drive this change and can make the difference. And I do believe that the companies that are champions, like Rob was saying before, started 5 to 10 years ago to start investigating how they can reduce the carbon emission and can make low carbon products. And now that they have finished all the scaling and all the search phase, now they can scale this. They can demonstrate that farmers can become more sustainable and low carbon without having impact on their financials, without having actually by having also advantages on their cost reduction in producing wheat, corn, rice, and whatever. So I do believe that we need to rely on champions and help them also in the go-to-market, I would say, in showing how these products that are more sustainable with accurate data are the way to go for consumers.
Just one thing to mention, because you mentioned cost and you mentioned price, and I think it's important to say it here. The difference between producing meat, organic meat, and producing normal meat, it's about 10%, and perhaps less than 10% difference. The problem is that when you go to the supermarket, people that are going to buy the bio or the organic, they're going to buy either mincemeat, they're going to buy a filet, or they're going to buy a steak. You don't see other bio products, other organic products. What happens is that this is only a very small percentage of the entire animal. So you have to concentrate the 10% additional cost for the animal, or less than 10% additional cost, in these 3 products, which make it much more expensive. So how can policy help there? I don't have an answer, but that would be an interesting way to have it. So if everything is done in a different set of way, then the cost for the consumer in the end is not that great. So
I think that if we took into account health and climate costs, okay, and we incorporated that in the true cost of the products, and removed the government subsidies on meat, fish, chicken, and eggs and dairy, I think that the cost would be, the price to the consumer would be real. And we would really see what it, what it does to our future.
Hannah's getting rid of subsidies now. The ones she doesn't like.
No, and I think this is a really interesting point, because, of course, food prices have gone up recently, and, how can we increase the purchasing of sustainable products? and also keep food affordable, I think it is a real challenge. And I'd actually like to hear from you, Hanna, on sort of how you see that short-term gap being filled.
How I see the short-term gap between, can you
So in the short term, between now and when alternative proteins cultured meats sort of come to the market.
Plant-based,
Yeah.
right? It's available in the market.
Okay, thank you. We'll
So-
take that. So staying on the role of the consumer here, obviously we've seen that our diets need to change, and obviously food labeling is coming into this. And I know we've already touched on food labels a bit, but we haven't really touched on like food miles. And I'd like to come to you, Sébastien, and ask you about, sort of how your model works with obviously the delivery. Like, is this something that your consumers are concerned about?
Sorry, what are they concerned about?
The food miles associated with their food.
The transportation, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the delivery sector is last mile logistics, so it's pretty short distance. And actually, we're trying to optimize as much as possible distance traveled to reduce the miles that are done by the couriers. To be honest, I don't think it's a concern from our customers, but for us, in terms of both sustainability and efficiency, optimizing these delivery routes is a top priority. What we're doing is what we call bundling. So bundling is when a same courier picks up different packs of food or different groceries product and delivers that to different customers on the same route. So we started to develop this kind of algorithm, and this is gaining more and more developed, and we can add more and more pickup points and delivery points to optimize the delivery routes. And for us, that's good for business, and that's good for sustainability as well. And it's part of our increasing bundling is part of our carbon emission reduction plan. So we have a target to bundle 30% of all the orders that are generated in the app by 2030.
Thank you very much. And I think keeping on sort of looking at consumers and the role that they play, I'd really like to come to you, Giovanni, and ask, because obviously you've sort of got two consumers. You've got the farmers, but you've also got the supply chain. So could you sort of give a bit of a picture who plays a bigger role and how they interact and how you sort of provide that middle piece of the puzzle?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, our sort of consumer of our application is, as you said, farmers, but as well as supply chain food companies. And there are different go-to-market for us for them. Of course, one key point and that has always to be thought is that sustainability in farming is always related to reducing the cost. So once this is understood, a sustainable farmer is also a farmer that spends less to produce the same quantity. And so once this is agreed and understood by farmers with real data, with examples, this becomes much more easy. So they embrace this challenge and they move, for example, to regenerative practices, so to crop rotations, so to cover crops, and all the kind of things that are now helping soil to regenerate. And when it comes instead to food companies, this is mainly demanded by their consumers, so by their customers. So we see that, for example, at least in Europe, our customers, so food companies, tell us that having a sustainable declaration in the package increases the chance of selling that product by 15%. So it's not too much, but it's already a standard that is being shown in the last years. And so they have to do something in this. And it's not only about making a claim, saying I'm sustainable, but it's also having the, good amount of data and right information behind in order to make that claim, because there is WWF, there are several companies that are looking at this and trying to find who's not saying the right thing. So this is where we are working on.
Thank you. Did you have something?
Yeah, I would just maybe compliment on that because, and perhaps touch on the point that you mentioned on the transition to the future, because you were talking about having a sustainability label on the package. What label? Are we talking about animal welfare? Are we talking about carbon footprint? Are we talking about plastic? Are we talking about nutritional value? All of them are standardized labels in the industry, but do you put them all? Which one is the most important? Which one is the most relevant? Which one the consumer will go for it? So these are all questions that we have not answered yet as food. And I'm not only talking about meat, we're talking in general here. So this is something that we need to answer, or perhaps make something a little bit more reachable for the consumer. Because sometimes when I'm in the supermarket, I also don't know the difference between the different labels if it's something outside of my area of expertise. So this makes a difference in the way we market our products. So this is the point that I wanted to make. So we have a lot of labels. We need to make sure that we make it more understandable, but we also need to know what we want to say with it. So this is a challenge.
Thank you. And I think one thing that sort of follows on from the consumer piece is also food security. And, you know, that this points to the sort of equitable piece of this question. And, you know, I'd really like to come to you, Rob, because I know we discussed it previously to this panel, is, you know, the true cost of food and those hidden factors behind our food production and how this impacts food security.
Well, I was enjoying the discussion, the debate over there, so I'll use that and maybe use it as a segue in. You know, the word equitable is a really interesting word. I'm going to come back to that to have on this panel. You know, when I first moved to London in 2000, I was always amazed that the green beans came from Kenya, and would be proudly, you know, saying green beans from Kenya. And I thought, wow, that's a wonderful thing, right? Because we're giving jobs to people in Kenya, and there's a growing economy there as a result, and global trade is helping people around the world. If you just decide that you're going to localize everything, friendshore everything, onshore everything, there are going to be a lot of Kenyan farmers that are not happy this week, right? And so we come back to this question of balance, priorities, how people view the world, what their beliefs are. I think people think that environmentalism is sort of one thing or the other, right? Black and white. I guarantee if you ask this group up here, who I think leans very heavily towards doing the right thing from an environmental point of view, we will all have a different matrix in our heads, right? So there is no right answer, there is no wrong answer. And I think when it comes to food, understanding the externalities that go into the creation of the food, and you were getting onto this in terms of, for example, the amount of carbon that was used to create, you know, whatever, the plant or the meat-based product that you're consuming, that's really important. That's not in the label today, right? One day it will be, most likely, but it hasn't happened. You know, and then there's always this debate about, well, the standards for the West, are they going to be the same as the standards for the developing world? And, you know, how's the West going to feel about that if they start raising the standards and not everybody is following suit? So it's a really interesting time where I think the debate, the discussion is important. And I think we always have to remember there's not absolute right or absolute wrong in these discussions.
Thank you. Does anybody else have a take on food security? I think, if I remember correctly, Sébastien, you have, as part of your model, you do deliveries to shelters and provide for those who are sort of in less need. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so actually our vision is to give access to anything to everyone in the cities. So we're working on inclusion, no? Digital inclusion. And one of our programs is called Glovo Access. So we launched this program during the pandemics because, you know, lots of people were stuck at home with mobility issues. So we started delivering and for charities. So using the logistics for good, no, and making it accessible for free for NGOs, for food banks, and we kept doing that over time. I think we've been delivering about 3 million meals to charities, and to make sure we can finance that, because it's a significant cost for Glovo. Imagine we have this program which is open to any charity to use the logistics. So we decided to put in place an impact fund. So basically, for each order that is delivered in any country, there is a small share of the revenues that are going to finance the Glovo Access program to make it scalable and to make sure that we have sufficient funding for it. And more recently, we're testing a new way of giving, which is that we built what we call solidarity delivery centers. So if you're a bit familiar with the delivery space, you might know about dark stores. So these supermarkets in the city centers that delivers really fast. So we're building these solidarity delivery centers, which are small dark stores, but just operate to donate to vulnerable people. So what we do is collecting food surplus from supermarkets. We concentrate this food surplus in these central points. We collaborate with NGOs who are running the centers. And then we're using last mile delivery to deliver these packs of foods to people that can't go to food banks, for instance, because of mobility issue. And here the dream is to start cutting the hunger lanes. So yeah, that's what we're doing. That's the approach. I mean, still the beginning, but with this impact fund and this commitment to link our growth to this charity program, the idea is for this to be able to scale in the future.
Thank you.
So I'm just going to say that I think that unless we do major shift, a major change in our food system, we can't really feed 9+ billion people. I mean, there's no other way. There's no way to do that. So we all, I think, agree here that we need a change. Question is which change, but.
Thank you. And I know we're coming to the end of our time, so I'm really looking forward.
In fact, have run out of time 7 minutes ago.
We've run out of time, so I thank you very much to our panel, and I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Thank you, panelists.